Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and in the studio with us is Bill Moyer. He is the founder of the Backbone Campaign, backbonecampaign.org, and has got a new gig here, or a new project, shall we say, Solutionary Rail. Bill, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
And tell us, what is Solutionary Rail?
Well, you know, as we fight against things, it's way better for us, and it's way more strategic to also be fighting for things. I like to say that our no is only as powerful as our yes is compelling. So Solutionary Rail is a way of addressing the use of our rail for fossil fuel commodities. Specifically, you know, I'm based in the Pacific Northwest, so that's seen as a shortcut to Asia for Powder River.
Hell of a lot of coal coming out of there.
A lot of coal, now Bakken oil and tar sands oil. So that inspired Backbone Campaign to get involved on that issue. And in the process, we met railroad labor folks who said, hey, we've got our own issues with the way that BNSF is doing business. And then a guy actually said, hey, we've got this Northern Corridor paper. Why don't you see if you can green this? Because of clearly, you know, railroad is a super important infrastructure for sustainability and addressing climate issues. And
it's because it's one of the most efficient ways to transport things.
Way more efficient than moving around, period. And then it's even more efficient if you electrify. But in this country, the railroads are privately owned. And so they're not going to make that infrastructure investment in the electrification like they're doing everywhere else.
Right.
I mean, the Trans-Siberian Railroad was electrified in 2002. UK is electrifying, Germany is electrifying, Ethiopia is electrifying their rail.
Wow.
But in the United States, because the private corporations that own the railroad corridors would get charged property tax on improvements, they're not going to make that systemic-wide improvement. Right. And yet, we as a country really need that kind of a move forward.
Now, in 1980, part of the Libertarian Party's platform was to privatize the rail system in the United States. Was there a time when the rails were mostly publicly owned?
No, I don't think there was ever a time that the rails were mostly publicly owned. The rails were privately owned, and they had an obligation to serve the public. In 1970, we passed the act that recreated Amtrak. That was a bailout of the railroad systems, because when we built the freeway infrastructure, all that freight and those passengers fled the rails, and then we hit the roads.
Right.
Now, that freeway infrastructure is not paying for itself. The wear and tear of those trucks is way disproportionate to what they pay. Right. So our objective is to shift the economics of rail, to go and get that long-haul trucking back onto the tracks, to speed it up, to make it more efficient by putting a publicly owned and run railroad electrification infrastructure on the private rail right away. That way we can increase speeds of freight trains up to 80 miles an hour, and freight trains up to 80 miles an hour, and passenger to 110 and 125 on existing track.
Why not just nationalize it?
Well, you know, that's a great idea. I would be happy with nationalizing the railroads. I just think that's a bigger fight and more ideological than what we can actually do right now. And I think that we're okay right now. I think that we can create an alliance between rural communities, farmers, labor, rural power cooperatives, environmental justice advocates, and environmentalists, all to electrify the rail and power that railroad with renewable energy. One of the great things about us owning it is we can do certain public benefit mandates around labor conditions and around regularity of service. But a key one is that it be powered by renewable energy. The place that we're discussing, we're proposing a demonstration project. It's a pretty big demonstration project. It's 2,200 miles from Chicago to Seattle. Oh. That Northern Corridor section is a single owner BNSF railroad. And it stretches over multiple reservations and dozens of rural electrical cooperatives that were started in the 30s and 40s. Those rural electrical co-ops and those tribes, they can't build out their renewable energy portfolio. They can't build out their capacity unless they can have a place for those electrons to go at peak production. They can't get the financing.
And it could go into the rail system.
And this would give them that customer in perpetuity.
So one thing that occurs to me, we're right now on Sirius XM. And so all across the country, you got long-haul truckers who are listening to you say, we want to move people off trucks and onto the rail.
Yeah.
What do you say to people who say, hey, wait a minute, you're threatening my livelihood here?
Well, I think long-haul truckers would be the first ones to agree with you. Their livelihood is very hard living, and they're having a really hard time actually hiring enough long-haul truckers. And for the Teamsters who are part of the trucking industry, they're going to have a lot better organizing opportunity to do short-haul and medium-haul truckers who can be regionally and locally organized, and their penetration into the long-haul trucking is minimal. So we haven't had any objections there. I think that the long-haul truckers, just like the railroad labor that we've been working really close with, Railroad Workers United, we got a resolution from the Washington State Labor Council this last month in pushing Governor Inslee to be a champion for this. They want to see a different kind of railroad system. These folks haven't had a schedule, and they're on call 24/7. It creates chronic fatigue within the system and very harsh, difficult conditions for whistleblowers.
Sure. So where does the money come from to electrify this 2,200 miles of rail?
80% of it we're proposing would come from private activity bonds, and 20% of it would come from TIFIA loans. We're proposing that the governors along the Northern Corridor, specifically Jay Inslee of Washington State, Governor Bullock of Montana, and Governor Dayton of Minnesota, that they combine their efforts and their departments of transportation and form a nonprofit corporation called a Steel Interstate Development Bank. That entity could access those public funds, that financing, not taxpayer dollars, and to pay for the first 2,200 miles of this project, which costs $5.5 billion. It's about a $2 million to $2.5 million per electrification mile, and that would be continued to be owned in perpetuity by the public entity and would charge the railroads user fees.
This we have a minute and a half left or so. Where'd this idea come from?
Well, some folks in Virginia, the Steel Interstate Coalition and Rail Solutions had done some work a few years back that I'd heard of, and I was really inspired by it. But they didn't have a strong labor component, and they were concentrating on the I-81 corridor. They also didn't have a mandate for renewable energy. So the folks who were associated with that, I've had a great team, a technical team. Steve Krismer, principal track geometry engineer from Amtrak, Bruce McFarlane, an economist, lots of folks from around the country. And so for the last couple of years, we've been working to take that 2008 Northern Corridor Improvement Paper, take the Steel Interstate proposal for I-81 and take our own public benefit mandates and a coalition building experience and applying that to a very positive yes that people should all be able to get behind, and it will help unlock a truly just transition to a sustainable transportation infrastructure and stabilizing the variability of renewable energy.
Wow. This is a major project. So where's the renewable energy going to come from for this rail system? Are you talking about solar panels all along the railroad?
Well, this is coming from these rural electrical co-ops that are all there, the tribes. So we can be doing wind, we can be feeding in from the communities who are depressed and underserved by rail since it abandoned them so many
So you're giving these
ago.
communities an opportunity to basically make some money providing the energy for the transportation.
That's right. And that's just on top of, having greater access to the rest of the world for their freight and their own manufacturing and getting people
and travel for that matter.
Travel for that matter, right? It's their lifeline.
Cool. Bill Moyer is, it's called solutionaryrail.org is the website, and /petition at the end of that.
Thank you.
Okay,
Folks can /petition. We want everybody's support to push Jay Inslee to be a champion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a second.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
That's Bill Moyer at Solutionary Rail. We'll be right back.